We learned so much.
All right, I gotta go get the show notes. I didn't see Randy. I missed a step, man.
Yeah, well, if you had a better night's sleep, you would have been fine, right? So getting close, are we?
Yeah, I got it, man. So let's do screen share. Boom. And I'm rolling, man. Hey, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. And those who don't know, I'm Teddy Burriss. Our special guest today is John Pueschel. And it's going to be a conversation that will be beneficial to all of us, including me and Randy, and about employment law. And so Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy is sponsored by the Elder Law Firm. If you have never talked to the Elder Law Firm and you have elderly parents or other people in your life who are important to you, I recommend you reach out to the Elder Law Firm in Greensboro, North Carolina, say hello to them and have a conversation. Remember, let them know that Randy Wooden told you to call them. So, Randy,
hey,
good seeing you, buddy.
Hey, we're back again. We don't have too many more shows this month before we're off and running into July.
Yeah.
So the first of two attorneys back to back, by the way. We'll get more into detail with that. Two different topics, but John will join us today. We'll talk employment law. First, though, Randy Wooden with Goodwill Industries of Northwest North Carolina. If you are one of two or three in the galaxy who don't know who I am, I happen to run our professional center here in Winston. And I'm happy to help you if you're a job seeker that might be between jobs or maybe employed. And like a lot of folks say, hey, you know what? The water's warm. Jump in and see what's out there. We're happy to help. Work by appointment. So find me on LinkedIn. A lot of people have questions about, you name it, employment law, non-competes, social justice, lots of stuff swirling around the employment scene these days. There's a lot of things. They're very important to a lot of folks. And thank goodness we have somebody on here who can sort it all out for us. And John Pueschel joins us. John, known you for some time now, been involved with some of the things we do here at our professional center, Goodwill. But you are a partner with Womble Bond Dickinson, been there for a good number of years, and I'm sure you have seen a heck of a lot over the years, right?
Sure have.
Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more detail and I always ask the why question. So hopefully you've got that teed up in the background there a little bit, but yeah, a little bit more in your background.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for my long-awaited invitation to the show. So you guys have a great platform. I appreciate the chance to be with you guys. I'm John Pueschel. I'm a partner at the law firm of Womble Bond Dickinson. I sit in Winston-Salem, where I was born and raised.
Yeah.
After a few-year detour in Charlotte. But my practice is entirely employment. I work with companies every day to help them solve people problems. Some are good problems, some are not so good problems from the company's perspective. But I've done that my whole career, which is just around 21 years now. So I'm honored to be here today.
So what's your why? I always ask that. Is it a single instance or a series of events that pointed you toward the direction that you've pursued?
It's a hard one. I think I do have faith and believe the Lord put you where he's supposed to. And I think I've ended up where I am supposed to. I always have been interested in the law for whatever reason. Justice has always been important to me. And so I always had in the back of my head that I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be involved in people helping people. I wanted to be involved in people doing the right things. And then I went to law school. Sometimes I learned that justice is not always done, and it's not always a justice system. It can be a legal system, but I'm glad to be a part of it. And I find it really rewarding. I think I do things to help people. I think I do things to help business, which helps people as well. So that's the why for me.
Yeah, I got to ask you this. And by the way, Teddy is going to monitor the chat box. So if you're watching us live here on Zoom, we're actually on we're on LinkedIn and also on Facebook. So if you're watching live, Teddy's going to try to keep an eye on all three of them. I know it's a tough job, but Teddy is sharp. Teddy, have you ever been an attorney?
Good thing I got all 10 fingers.
You got to keep on top of things. But if you do have comments or questions for John, please put them in the chat area. Hey, I'm wondering, you talk about working with, solving problems and such. I'll put this into two boxes. One is prevention or preventative legal advice, and the other is, oh crap, we're in it now. Help us figure out what we need to do. I'm sure you deal with both. Do you have a preference in one or the other on that?
Yeah, absolutely. A preference on trying to avoid problems in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's one of the nice things about my practice. And it's one of the things I take a lot of comfort in, because I work with a lot of great companies, all different sizes. I work with startups and mid-market and some really big companies around here that everyone has heard of. And one of the things I take comfort in is that those companies are by and large trying to do the right thing. They have a lot of people dedicated to making sure their workers are taken care of. They put a lot of money and resources into it. And so one of the things I take comfort in is that I see companies trying to do the right things by people. Nobody's perfect and they don't always do it right, but I like that effort of trying to work with them to avoid problems in the first place. But certainly things happen, and that's fun.
Yeah.
Fun for me, not fun for the company.
No, not at all. Does it matter whether they're in North Carolina or out? Or in other words, are you dealing with only federal law, or are there certain state laws that kind of restrict you to working with those here in North Carolina?
No, I'm not restricted entirely to North Carolina. My bar license only goes as far as the border. So it's there's things you have to do, hoops you have to jump for if you're going to appear in another place. But if you're doing federal law, you can pretty much do that almost anywhere.
Right.
And a lot of what I do is compliance. So I get to work with companies all over the place on compliance, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, because anymore it's a global world here. We've got offices throughout the nation and in the world, and different, I assume, different laws in different areas. So lots to keep in mind here. So let's dive into this COVID. In case you haven't heard, if you're watching us, COVID has been around for a couple of years now, and it's kind of sort of had a little impact on how we conduct our business and our lives. So here's the thing, and I don't know if it's a gut feel or if we can document it, but just the workplace doesn't feel the same. And I think that was something you had mentioned, John, that it just doesn't feel like it was pre-COVID. So what does that mean? Let's unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly my perception of things.
Yeah.
I think a lot of other people have shared that too. Things just feel different since COVID. I think a lot of things are going into that. One, most places are not fully back to work. Most places still are allowing remote or flexible work for part of their workforce. So if you're in the office like me, not everybody is here. So it feels a little empty. When you go out in public, it can still be a little weird. You'll see people in masks. You'll see people, or I've seen people ask people to not stand so close to them. So I think the world still feels a little weird. And I think it feels a little weird in the workplace. It's a little bit like, almost like I kind of analogize it to summer school. You're in school and it's school, but it's not really school because it's really just a few people there. I get that feeling or a sense of it a lot. That's probably just me personal, but I know it's a shared experience that the workplace just feels different right now.
You used a phrase earlier, John, in the green room, when you said work is not really a place, it's everywhere. And probably more so.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you remember back in March 2020, with all of the lockdown orders, most of which have been lifted in most places, you couldn't go into the office. And so businesses had to scramble to survive, to get work done if they were not an essential business. And so what that meant is figuring out how to allow their workers to work remotely. And just a little history on that, for a lot of different reasons, companies had been somewhat resistant to allowing employees to work remotely. So there were some industries or some jobs where, it was all remote, call center kind of work and those kinds of things. But like in tech and in other places where there's a lot of collaboration, there was a feeling that you needed to be in the office and have that interaction to do that. So when COVID arrived, that kind of went out the window. And so businesses said, well, we got to get this job done, even if it's not perfect. What can we do? And so you saw this mass exodus from the workplace into people's homes. You were on the video conferences like I was all throughout 2020 with kids in the background crying, dogs barking incessantly. And people I found pretty tolerant of that.
So, and it's one thing to have a different feel, you're an attorney, so let's kind of pivot to see what has that feel brought about in terms of litigation, and what are companies allow, like if they say, hey, Randy, if you don't show up for work, you're fired. Can companies do that? And under what rationale are they able to do that?
Yeah, I think I'll start with just a high level premise, which was, employment law did not change. It has not changed very much at all since 2020. The things that were the law in 2020 are still the things that are the law now. So you can't discriminate, you can't harass people, you can't retaliate. You got to pay people for the work they do. You got to pay overtime. All of that stuff has stayed exactly the same. But what has changed is where people are working. The attitudes of the people that are working are different now. Events that are happening in the country are shaping things. And two good examples of that are sort of the vaccine mandates and the very, profound national discussion on racial justice and social justice following the George Floyd murder in 2020. So a lot of those things have changed, I think, people's attitudes and their expectations, but the law hasn't changed. But companies have to be adept at kind of managing sort of this new normal that they're now seeing in the post-COVID, hopefully, or emerging from COVID era.
Well, what does that mean as far as me as a worker bee? And I was able to work from home, and now they're saying I have to go back in or I lose my job. Or what can companies, and what if I say, hey, I'm immune, what is that? So I have issues with immunity stuff, let's say. So where I'm driving at is, what's the law going to do now when it relates to work from home, work remotely, hybrid, that kind of a thing? Are there cases pending, or what does this look like? Can they force me to physically go into work if I don't feel safe, for example?
Yeah, there's limitations on that,
Okay.
but the general rule is that the job is where the employer says it is, right?
Yep.
So if it's a manufacturing facility and you're working on an assembly line, that job can only be done in the facility. There's no real issue about that. The recurrent kind of issue that keeps coming up are what about the jobs that don't necessarily have to be done in a plant or in a facility? So think of bookkeeping jobs, think of tech support jobs, think of sales jobs, things like this that can be done remotely. There are a lot of reasons a company may want a person in the office. Collaboration, so you can yell down the hall, so they can meet people, so they can be engaged, which helps with retention. So there's a lot of valid reasons that employers may require it, but employers also want people. And right now, employees have a lot of leverage. There's a lot of mobility in the workforce. People can make the choice to switch laptops and change companies without going anywhere now. So companies are, even if they would, if in a perfect world, to say, I want everybody in my office, they're having to be more flexible because they want to get talent or they want to retain talent. But yeah, they can make you come in. The only exception would be sort of disability issues. So you mentioned if you're immunocompromised, then you would do the traditional reasonable accommodation analysis under the ADA that has not changed at all, which is, can we accommodate that, or would it be unreasonable to accommodate that?
Teddy, there's a question.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Katrina posed this question for you, John. If a person's required to work remote and they fall in their home during the work hours, who's accountable? The home or workman's comp? Or is that going to be a difficult one to answer?
The phone call to Pueschel right there. I'm telling you, that's
we have definitely gotten those calls. And I know I don't specialize in workers' comp, but I've read about it. One of my colleagues here does a lot of it. But the general rule is, if you are working, if you're in the course and scope of working and you get hurt, then that's a compensable injury under workers' compensation law. So the fight is always about, well, you didn't have a safe home. We can't control that. We told you to make sure you didn't have tripping hazards and things like that. So I'm sure there's always there's going to be fights between insurance companies on who's liable for that.
Yeah. So when I get up and do my laundry and trip over my dog, I guess that doesn't quite pass the smell test.
Randy, don't do that during the show.
I don't have a dog, but I am pretty clumsy. But so there are some challenges then with understanding, can we force people to come back to work? Yeah. I've got to ask you this too, and this there's different costs of living across the country. And I know there's inflation and all that, but just push that aside. And to live in New York City and to live in, pick a small town in the middle of what I'll call, rural America, I'm sure there are different costs of living involved there. And if the job is a remote position, what's the stance on how companies compensate folks? And can I, in effect, demand the same, if I'm that remote worker in rural America, can I say I'm doing the same job as the guy in New York City? Why are you paying me different? Same thing as male versus female. If I'm doing the same work, shouldn't I get the same pay regardless of where I may live if the job is a remote environment?
Yeah, you are right on the bleeding edge of a lot of different points that businesses are really struggling with. And I don't have a good answer. Maybe you guys can come up with something on this call, but
time out. You do not want Randy and Teddy to come up with answers, John.
That's what I tell to me. I say I'm no attorney and I'm no tax guy, so don't come to me for either tax or legal advice. But that's something that, especially guys at the professional center. I mean, these guys are sharp and they can work remotely. And they say, I love Winston. Why would I want to move to Charlotte, or why would I want to move to a big city?
This is just a key point, key challenges for businesses right now, because work that can be done anywhere, folks are wanting to do it anywhere, and that has two consequences. It makes people more mobile, right? People can leave, but it also increases companies' opportunities and talent pool.
Yeah, it does.
So, for example, you could never have hired someone in Utah for a programmer, maybe 10 years ago. Now everybody is doing that. And so when you do that, you've got to figure out, how are we going to pay these folks in a fair way that doesn't bankrupt us, because if you're in LA or somewhere in California or New York City where the cost of living is high, a job generally is going to have higher pay. Well, what about the same person that's doing that in Greenville, North Carolina, which has a much lower cost of living? And companies have responded to that in different ways. I'm not an expert, obviously, in that, but by and large, what I've seen is that companies are pegging comp to the job. And so if you're a programmer in Greenville or a lawyer in Winston-Salem, and you are getting paid as if you lived in New York, that can be a good thing for the worker. But
it sure can be. But I mean, I think back before remote work, before COVID and everything else, and if companies got 30 locations across the country, a couple of them happen to be in Chicago, LA, New York, whatever, and the other ones are in the middle of nowhere. They're still doing the same job. Now it's not remote because they were on premises, except that the premise happened to be in rural America. A lot of that happens. I used to be a headhunter. A lot of the manufacturing firms would locate in places where land is cheap and labor is cheap.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why a lot of the auto manufacturing moved farther south over the years, and away from Detroit and some of the bigger cities, for the cost of land and labor. So it's just an interesting thing. And you couple the whole Great Resignation, where now workers have more power. We're actually seeing unions making a bit of a return, maybe not a huge one, but I mean, they were kind of almost dormant there for a while. And was it Starbucks and Apple? I mean, these are big companies.
Amazon warehouses.
Starbucks.
Are you seeing an uptick in that? Just out of curiosity, an uptick in, I guess, companies seeking your counsel on, hey, we don't want this in our place. How do we guard against unions? I assume you're getting some of those calls.
Yeah, one of the one of the big trends right now is just workers having much more power than they did, a much more leverage for a lot of different reasons that we can unpack if you like, but workers have more leverage. And so folks that don't feel like they're being paid equitably, people that don't feel like they're being treated well, are much more inclined to try to figure out a way to organize, to, leverage their leverage that they have over employers. The South is historically very low union. And so I think historically like 1 or 2% in North Carolina. So in North Carolina, you're not seeing a lot of union activity, but you're seeing sort of targeted upticks of it. A couple of years ago, or maybe 3, as time telescopes on me, one of the hospitals up in the mountains here in North Carolina, their nurses unionized because had been an acquisition or a change in control of the hospital and they didn't like it. And so that got a lot of people's attention in North Carolina because that was not unusual. And so you'll see these, these national businesses where you have unions, Starbucks are in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're starting to see conversations at the minimum.
Yeah. Teddy, there are a couple of questions sitting
let me go with Lisa's question.
Yeah.
She asked this, so you work in, I'm gonna give A and B some names. You live in North Carolina, but you work for a company in New York. Where does the employee go for unemployment filing? I think I know the answer, but I'm relying on you.
Yeah, it's typically the state where the employee is. Yeah. And so if he lives and is working in New York is going to claim that person as a worker in the state. So you'll have to comply with New York tax law, New York unemployment law, New York paid sick leave law. Yeah. Conversely, the New York company that hires someone in North Carolina doesn't have to worry about any of that stuff. Well, they have to worry about, workers' comp, but none of the state specific, like the paid sick leave or any of those things. They don't follow the company. They do.
So the employee would go to their state of residence.
Typically, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So here's another one. Discrimination. Companies, this is I think an opinion that Mike shared. Many companies won't hire people who don't have at least 10 years left in their career. Mike doesn't have that. Is this employer criteria ageism? And what are you seeing in that context, and how would someone address that if they feel that?
I think one of the toughest kinds of discrimination to litigate and sort out what actually happened is age discrimination. No one is writing down why you're making a decision on an employee, and there's a million reasons that kind of go into that, million things that go into that decision. But I'm old enough and human enough to know that people may tend to have their own biases about whether someone that's older can keep up with the pace, or maybe they think that the younger folks has better, more modern tech skills. All of those things are species of age discrimination, right? When you really unpack it, because the bias is built upon a person's age. And so typically that's unlawful. The problem is proving it.
Yeah. So
John, something you'd mentioned, you did a panel discussion a few years ago, and actually was paying attention, Teddy. I was paying attention to this guy. So one of the things that stuck with me when we got into the age issue is something you had said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was that ageism is about the only discrimination that changes over time. If I'm a male, or if I'm white, or I'm, whatever I am, I am that. But age is relative. If a 20-year-old is interviewing me and I'm 40 years old, to them, I'm old. That's right. If a 40-year-old is interviewing a 60-year-old, maybe you see where I'm going with that? It's a kind of the beauty in the eye of the beholder, because age it changes.
Yeah, that's right. I don't remember saying that, but it's a sharp point. So
it was. See? Yeah, you're welcome over there.
Yeah, a lot of the other characteristics are immutable. You can't change them. They are
what you are. Yeah.
But age does change, and I think that's one of the challenges. Because as a defense lawyer, a case comes to me, the first thing I have to do is figure out what happened. What did actually happen? What actually did motivate this person to make this decision? So when you're trying to get to the bottom of it, very rarely will somebody say, I'm biased against Randy because he's old, right? They'll say, I'm not biased against Randy. I actually have a bias towards the younger person that had this programming skill set that Randy does not have. That's what you hear, and so those cases are very, very challenging to prove. Some are easy though. Some people say, I can't teach an old dog new tricks. That gets said all the time. We were looking for, some fresh blood in the organization. That's, code for we wanted a young person. So sometimes it's kind of easy to sort out what happened, but a lot of times it's not, because my experience has been most people that make those decisions, and I believe they're sincere, right? I believe they're sincere. I'm not trying to be biased against Randy, they would say, but, I had to make the right decision. And I just felt younger Joe was the better choice.
I'm wondering too, now with the toughness in trying to find workers and where, back in the day, if I had 30 people I could pick from, then, okay, I can pick, the young, handsome Teddy Burriss over the old, scraggly Randy. And 9 times out of 10, that's how the chips will fall. But now I think companies have to be a little more creative in how they recruit and retain folks. And my hope is, as speaking as a senior citizen, that they would look more favorably upon people like me, because for a variety of reasons. I'll tell you one, and speak to this if you would. I don't know from the U.S. Department of Labor the average tenure for a worker, but I'm guessing certainly somebody in their 20s or 30s is more apt to change jobs more frequently than somebody in their 50s or 60s. And so if you're realistically only going to have someone for, let's say, 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years at the most, maybe, wouldn't it make sense to get somebody who you could plug and play, who's been there, done it, and you don't have to babysit them, and they don't have the childcare issues, they don't have some of the other challenges that perhaps that younger person would have. So I'll get off my soapbox for a moment, but if you could address that, what are some tips you could give or encouragement maybe to employers to say, take a look at guys like Randy and Teddy?
I validate everything that you say. And the good news for Randy and Teddy is I don't think I have to tell employers that. I think they've gotten that message.
Good.
So with the great resignation or great reshuffling, whatever you want to call it, I looked up the numbers, the final numbers from 2021, 47 million people changed jobs from the beginning of COVID through the end of 21. So I'm not a math major, but 50 out of about 300 million total people is a lot of workers.
Yeah. Well, they don't all work either. So what was there, only half of the population actually works? I think something like that.
I looked at the unemployment numbers, and so the unemployment is like less than 4% now in June. And the alleged, it feels wrong to me, but the alleged labor participation rate, so workers that are old enough to work that are not, is like 5.7 million in June. I don't know, I think I'm a little bit jaded on politics. I think they cook those numbers on both sides. So, but I can tell you right now, it is very hard to find workers. And so with the great resignation, compiled with, the dwindling 401ks we've had over the last year, we've seen people delay retirement or people coming back out of retirement. I've seen some people call that boomerang retirees. And I think businesses are putting, they're willing, I think a lot of businesses are willing to give that a pretty a keen look, because they're saying, why are we going to spend 5 years and all of our money training a 22-year-old that is then going to leave?
Yeah.
And they're taking their value to another organization where we can bring back Teddy, who retired 4 years ago, that knows what he's doing and wants to be here, because he's choosing us. He could choose whatever he wants to do, or not work, or stay retired. So I do think companies are looking at it, and I think that's a positive.
Yeah.
And before we go on our 30-minute halfway through the show break, 2 things. Number one is my demands are much simpler, because I don't need all the money that I used to get. All I need now is, a fair wage and a good cigar bar and a kegerator in my office. And then I also, I read an article just this morning, and I can't attribute exactly where the article is, but you can do a search and find it. Amazon is predicting in 2024, they're going to run out of their labor pool. So think about that for a little bit. And it's a big crisis in Amazon. So, and not just in Amazon, I would say it's probably a crisis that a lot of large organizations are dealing with, and maybe not just large organizations. So, hey, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. Our special guest today is John Pueschel. The conversation is about employment law. Lunch Conversation is sponsored in part by the Elder Law Firm out of Greensboro, North Carolina. I love this statement: who's important to you and how you plan to honor your responsibilities to them is important to the Elder Law Firm too. So if you have people in your family who need estate planning conversations or elder care planning conversations, reach out to the Elder Law Firm out of Greensboro, North Carolina, 336-396-4551. And remember this, let them know that Randy told you to call. Back at you, buddy.
Or else.
Or else.
Hey, John, before I forget, Forsyth Tech had a great presenter maybe a month or two ago. I'll send the link to it. He had a great slideshow and explained the demographics behind why we can't find workers. Where are they? What are they doing? And how is that impacting business, and not just today, but in the future? You may find it interesting. To me, it was fascinating.
It was pretty awesome.
It really was. I'll get it to you.
I love that.
So, all right. So now let's put our waders on. Is that the right word? When you go into deep water?
We're going to hit floaties. I call them floaties, Randy.
Floaties. Okay. We're going to hit the George Floyd, social justice. I don't want no stinking politics at my company. All kinds of stuff. You got to be getting calls left and right about this. So we can take this any way you want to. Maybe just a broad overview. All right. So Floyd, that was summertime of 2020. Everybody was locked down. So everybody was glued to their Facebook and social media and stuck at home, and not a soul in the country could have avoided seeing it. So it was a huge visceral moment for people, because it wasn't just Teddy saying, hey, this happened. This was an actual video, and it was just replayed forever and ever. So hugely impactful. So let's understand, I guess, from your perspective, what are some of the main challenges or questions that you get around it? And what are you telling folks?
Yeah, so many things. I think I'd probably take one bigger step back. And so in 2016, 2017, and 2018, in employment, the main topic of discussion was Me Too, right? So harassment in the workplace, power imbalances in the workplace. And that conversation has kind of stopped for a couple of different reasons. Maybe we can come back to it. But what happened to kind of break that conversation that was happening in employment, and so that was like leading to pay equity studies, promotion, glass ceilings. What do companies do to sponsor female employees to help them advance in career and get positions of power? And so you go right into COVID. And so when COVID happened, lockdown, school closes, everybody's home, everybody is together. It all feels weird, immensely stressful. People are losing their jobs. Businesses are closing. And so you have all of that. And so while you're kind of in that almost like a little bit of a cocoon, you had George Floyd's murder in May of 2020. And it just galvanized the nation. It galvanized businesses. As you rightly said, you couldn't miss it. And so what the employment kind of angle on that is that following his murder, there was just tons of workers feeling compelled to speak out. So a little bit like Me Too, say, hey, I feel like I'm being treated, or I feel like I am marginalized in this way, and it isn't right. So not just people feeling, empowered to speak up, but almost compelled to speak up. I'm speaking up not just for me, but for other folks too. And we're not being treated in being fairly. And so when you talk about that in the workplace, you're talking about opportunities for promotion, opportunities for advancement, wages, a lot of different things touch on sort of fairness and equity. And so businesses who, had leaders who were people that were also shocked by what they had witnessed, and wanting to have that kind of discussion on, well, what can we do to break down institutional barriers? What can we do to break down sort of these implicit biases that we think people have internally, that we all have? What can we do? And so what you have seen is just a real focus on how do we make the workplace fair and equitable? How do we bring racial justice into the workplace? What can our company do to speak out on these issues? Mm-hmm. And all of which is a positive thing. But the consequence of that is, we know from the last election that not everybody sees the world differently. So you have about 50% Democrat, 50% Republican, or conservative, or liberal, or whatever label you want to put at it. And those folks look at the world in different places. So what one person might view as justice, another one might put down as, hey, this is cram down of liberal policies, and they're making me do it as a condition of my employment, and that's not fair. And so maybe not always a legal issue, but a employee relations issue every time, because someone says, I don't want to do this bias training. I'm not biased. I don't discriminate. Why are you jamming this down my throat? I don't agree with the premise of implicit bias. Those kinds of things. And so if you're the HR person, you're trying to navigate those. And so with that, politics kind of has been poured into the workplace, and you add on top of that, all the debates, scientific and political, on vaccines and vaccine mandates, and all the litigation on that. There has just been a lot more politics in the workplace than folks, than HR folks in particular, are really comfortable having.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine. And our goodwill is no different. I mean, we have policies and procedures, and some of those were implemented as COVID hit, and as the George Floyd murder and that hit. And just to kind of pivot for just a moment, whether it's customers considering purchasing goods and services from your company, or you as a company trying to attract workers, I can see a shift from years ago. It was, hey, I have a good product at a good price, and I stand behind what I sell. And the fact that I'm a green company, or that I am, in tune to the environment, or I stand for good things in the community and community engagement, that was all kind of a side issue. It really was. Not now. Yeah. Things have changed a lot. And so it not only is it, I guess, what I would call an ethical decision, or, a moral decision to choose to do what many would say would be the right thing. The other is a financial one. I'm going to lose my butt here. If I can't find employees, I can't sell stuff. Yeah. I guess, what is the degree of change that you've seen? What's the focus of companies now? Is it shareholders, or is it the community, or is it a combination of both? I don't know. I'm just rambling, but jump in.
Yeah. I think it's all of those things. Yeah. So let's start with the public companies, the ones that actually have shareholders and institutional investors, the retirement funds and the money folks that have actual, influence over decisions. Those sort of social investors or organizations, those institutional investors, they have a lot of sway over companies. So you have seen, if you go and if you want to punish yourself and read proxy statements and annual reports all day, you will see a shift over the last 5-6 years. Every company has, public companies are, moving towards climate policies, sustainability. They're building in justice initiatives, racial, social justice issues. It's a response to investors, and public companies in the US, they kind of set the standard, so when a public company does it, like when they start offering paid parental leave, that trickles down, because the smaller mid-market companies have to compete for talent with them at sort of the lower margins. So that's very influential on employment in the US. And so you're right, you're seeing a real shift in that direction with the public companies. And to your very good point about, attracting talent, the youngest workers that are coming into the workforce now, Gen Z, the social studies, and there are experts on this. I'm not an expert, but I've listened to them. they're talking about how this generation, they want to make an impact in their job. They want to work at a place or a company that makes an impact, whether on environment or social justice. And so you'll see, I was surprised to see, how many companies, for example, immediately adopted, sort of the Black Lives Matter banner, hanging it up immediately. And I think there was two aspects of that. One, companies wanted to do the right thing, and they believed that to be the right and good thing. But it also kind of, from my perspective, kind of marked a shift. So companies might have said, look, I don't want to bring potentially divisive issues into the workplace. Other companies said, this shouldn't be divisive. We want our people to believe this and follow this, and this is who we are as a company. This is our value. And so I was surprised at how fast companies made that shift. So I think you're right on all of those points.
Silence is not allowed anymore. Take these big companies, if they just want to say no comment, we just want to sell product and sell it at a good price, they're being forced to get off the fence. I would say by consumers, by workers, to say, where do you stand on this? You can't take a pass anymore.
That is 100% correct. I hear that constantly. I think one of the influencers of that is just sort of the power of social media. So you can't escape it. You're going to get called out. You're going to get called out by your employees if they disagree with you on it. That's probably a shift, for folks of in my age and your age. Younger workers are much more. I think I mentioned it earlier. I do believe this. I can't back it up, but I do believe, again, it's not just a matter of feeling empowered to speak out, but in a lot of ways feeling compelled to speak out. I don't know if you watched in the news, the Washington Post drama a week or so ago, where one reporter was calling out another reporter for sharing a sexist joke, what the person thought was a sexist joke. And so it was like, week long of back and forth. And I know what's happening behind the scenes. The management is saying, can you guys just shut up? Stop doing this. It's embarrassing to the company. It's bad for the workforce. That's happening. And ultimately, the person had to be fired because they would not, Felicia Sonmez, I think was her name. She wouldn't stand down. She felt it was right, I'm presuming, and was calling out her organization. I think that happens all the time. So you're right. No sitting on the sidelines.
Now, but John, the cynic in me looks at what you just said, that the companies may be telling them to stop that public bickering, but those are media companies. They make money when people pay attention to them. And again, it's the cynic in me that is wondering if the owners of those media companies were saying, keep going to a certain degree. Anyway, that's just the cynic. Back at you, Randy.
Something you were mentioning, and I'm paraphrasing here. This was on Talking Point. I don't know if you have those points that we talked the other day when I shared, but the third one you mentioned about the Biden administration's enforcement policies in labor and employment have mirrored the focus on, being a force for change. Are you seeing, I guess, more activity from the feds coming down to kind of dictate what needs to happen? Or is this still more of an organic thing that these companies are saying, hey, this is the right thing, we need to do it?
Right now, I would say it's more company driven, because one of the things that has happened in litigation, there's been a decrease in overall employment claims, I think, outside of wage and hour. So less discrimination charges, less harassment charges. And why is that? It's because everybody's at home or everybody has just changed jobs. And so there's a lot of explanations on why there is less. It's harder to be harassed outside in your own home, I guess, is a way to look at it. So the drive that you're seeing is sort of enforcement priorities from the Biden administration. I think that given the opportunity, you're going to see them be very strong on racial justice. You're going to see them be strong on LGBTQ plus issues. You're going to see them be very strong on pay equity. You're going to see them, and you already are seeing them be very strong on, labor rights, union organizing rights, unfair labor practices. What you've seen in the Biden administration is basically a reconstitution of the Obama era Department of Labor, EEOC. So that covers OSHA, workplace safety, that covers wage and hour, that covers a lot of the vaccine mandates in the workplace, that covers equal employment opportunity and discrimination. And, as the Obama administration was, the President Biden administration is, they're going to be very strong advocates for employee rights and workplace safety. I think just right now, they haven't had a lot of opportunity to really wield that right because there's been less litigation and they do not have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate.
So a while back, you had mentioned that politics or political affiliation is not a protected class, such as gender, race, that kind of thing, but that today's world with the social justice that has intertwined with politics. And so that just creates for a big maze of challenges. Teddy, is there anything in the chat that you want to get to? I've got some other questions for.
Yeah, let's take Lisa's question.
Right.
Touch back on the non-compete again. Which is, have you seen non-compete clauses get, non-compete being laxed or relaxed because of the pandemic? Because people have to go work.
No.
Yeah,
I have not. This is just John talking, so I don't know if all practitioners would agree with this, but I do a lot of non-compete work. And when the labor market is tight, companies are much more likely to enforce their non-competes or try to, because they can't get replacement talent. If they can get replacement talent easily, which I think has somewhat been the environment so far, employers just say, I don't want to pay John, a bunch of money to chase this guy. We'll just hire somebody new. Yeah. And I think up to this point, I think that has kind of been how most companies have approached it. So I think the flexibility that people have gotten on their non-competes, and I've seen quite a bit of it, I don't think it's altruistic. I think the companies are just making a business decision. Teddy's replaceable. I don't want to spend money to chase him.
You hear that, Teddy?
That would be a narrow viewpoint, John.
About there's a question about do not rehire.
Yeah, let's talk. Mary says, what are your thoughts on being tagged by a company for do not rehire? So
I guess that could be getting at one of two things, or maybe both. And so in the employment context, if you get fired from a company, you might be tabbed in the system, not eligible for rehire. And that decision is as actionable as any others. So if that's based on a retaliatory reason, for example, you complained about discrimination and you resigned, and we said, well, that person's a complainer, they're not eligible for rehire. That's illegal. That's retaliation. You can't do that. People do it all the time. You could be eligible or not eligible for hire for good reasons that you stole from the company, or it could be for an unlawful reason, but it's like any other. The other things we see are in employment settlement agreements or severance agreements. And there were a lot of severance agreements back in COVID when companies downsized. And a lot of those agreements would have no rehire clauses. We're going to let you go. We're going to pay you money. We're sorry. We wish you well, but you can't come back to work here. And the reason they do that is just to make it harder for people to bring retaliation claims.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but that was a compensated agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah, that wasn't just get out of here and don't come back. Get out of here. I'm paying you to leave, and because I'm paying you, you're not coming back. Yeah.
Hey, John, you mentioned a little bit about the Me Too issue, and you said, hey, if we have some time, you may want to tackle that, maybe some rationale for why that may have kind of gone by the wayside a bit.
So Me Too is fascinating for me from the outside. The Harvey Weinstein story, the disgraced and imprisoned mogul who operated a pretty aggressive casting couch for a lot of years in Hollywood. His story broke, I think, in the New York Times or wherever it was. Ronan Farrow broke the story. I think that happened in October of 2016. And then after that, there was a political commentator named Mark Halperin who wrote a lot of books. He was everywhere at the time. And he lost his job within about a month of that story breaking because someone had claimed, or several women, I think, had claimed that at a prior job, like 10 years before, he had been inappropriate with them. And he lost his current job with ABC when that happened. I was like, whoa, I need to pay attention to this because this person just got fired for something that didn't even happen at their company. You know, there's sort of the media company element to that too. So over the next couple of years, you saw Me Too, and behind the scenes, just, you know, I work with a lot of companies, so I'm privy to a lot of decisions and how they get made. I began to see that particularly male managers began to say, I'm not going to go anywhere near a situation where I feel that this person's going to make a claim against me. So if they're not performing well, but I feel like they would claim that it is discriminatory, I'm just going to navigate around that. I think that's kind of borne out within public companies. If you are trying to be a high-level position in a public company, it is my opinion. I don't know if everyone would agree, but it's my opinion. If you have a credible complaint against you in the past, you are non-promotable if you can even be at a public company these days, because the focus is on fairness and equity. But all of that was kind of trending along, but a lot of people were expressing kind of discomfort. Well, how do we prove that? You know, how do we do this? Is a he said, she said. What do we need to do? We want to be responsible. We want to make sure our female employees are protected and valued and have opportunities here. How do we balance that? And then COVID and George Floyd happened. And so, you know, Me Too, you know, kind of paused or maybe even went away. But is my personal opinion that the Kavanaugh hearings, the Justice Kavanaugh hearings, may have been the end of the Me Too movement. Because one of the big aspects that you heard a lot in Me Too is, well, you know, women wouldn't be untruthful about complaints. You know, you need to take women seriously. You need to hashtag believe all women. And I'm not talking about Dr. Ford, who brought the principal complaint, but you might remember Michael Avenatti brought this string of other people with demonstrably improvable untrue claims. And like people were saying, like, you know, time out, you know, to what extent are we going to, you know, destroy and end people's careers over things that happened when they were teenagers in high school that you can't ever prove? And so I think for right now, I just think we see no Me Too. Nobody's really talking about Me Too. Companies are not talking about Me Too. And so I just think it may be dead for the moment as a movement. However, I do want to be very clear on one point. You know, that doesn't mean companies are just saying, forget about women. They absolutely are not. You know, that's sort of entrenched, and, you know, finding opportunity, protecting opportunities for women is paramount, I think, at most organizations.
Yeah, I'm with you, John. There's plenty of horrible activities going on today that would support the need for a Me Too movement to be going on. But unfortunately, they're being squelched by everything else.
Yeah, there's a limited bandwidth to handle everything. I know we've got just a few minutes left, and in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you to give us some takeaways, some things you want us to keep in mind. But I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to the discrimination issue and dealing with folks with a level of disability. And I get asked that from time to time. I'll have a client who may have a non-visible disability. Okay. It's one thing if I'm missing a limb or something that you can see, but what's your counsel on, hey, should I divulge it? And when in the process should I divulge it? And if I'm an employer, how do I steer in the good side of the law here and not leave myself susceptible to litigation?
That is a hard question.
In 30 seconds or less. No, take a couple minutes on that one. Take it where you want to.
Yeah, so sort of for the hidden disabilities, maybe anxiety, maybe migraines, those kind of issues, I don't think you need to disclose them during the offer process. There's an opportunity after you get the offer where, you know, the law kind of provides for the company to kind of sort that out with you. But I don't see any obligation on your part. And, you know, just to be selfishly economic actors, it's probably not a good idea to be sharing before you have an offer that you have a disability. On the good side, most companies I deal with are pretty accommodating on issues. They try to work with people. There's now much more knowledge about learning differences, these sort of hidden disabilities, much more awareness of stress and anxiety. So I think companies are a lot better than they were even 10 years ago at being willing to accommodate those things.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but I think by and large.
So reasonable accommodation is something that you've mentioned. Help us unpack that briefly. What does that mean?
So reasonable accommodation means to give an employee, either assistance or taking away a part of the job that's not essential. So if your job is to be a plumber and you don't have hands and can't tighten wrenches, you can't tighten pipes, you can't perform an essential function. So there's no accommodation that's possible, no reasonable accommodations possible for that.
Yeah.
But let's just say, you've got a bad back and you need to, sit down as a plumber for a couple of hours, on your shift, but you can still get most of your job done. Then you can perform most of the essential functions. And so allowing you to take time off, in some cases, allowing people to work remotely can all be reasonable accommodations.
Interesting analogy,
Yeah.
John. Years ago, I worked in a chemical plant where we were building a plant, and the plumber I worked for wrecked his motorcycle and broke 8 ribs. They let him come back and be my supervisor and yell at me for the next three months, telling me what to do. They gave him reasonable accommodations, but it aggravated the crap out of me, and I'm being a little facetious.
Hey, John, we got a couple minutes left. Why don't you give us a few takeaways, some things to kind of keep us on the straight and narrow here?
I think if you're an employer or you're a manager or maybe even a coworker, I think one of the things to keep in mind is to be patient with people. It's a very stressful time for everybody. I think not just workers, but particularly in businesses, where businesses are trying to do more with less. Everybody is fearing a looming looming recession and what that might mean. Is there going to be more layoffs? What's going to happen? Yeah. And so I think when you're dealing with your colleagues, peers, subordinates, or your managers, be a little more patient rather than automatically presuming people have bad motives. And I think that if there's a thing that I like least about social media, it's probably that. It's so easy just to send off something intemperate. I think most people in the corporate world have learned the lesson. You got to be careful in what you write in email, but I don't think people that use social media, particularly the younger folks, have necessarily view it that same way. So they're willing to send, in 8 words, the most inflammatory thing that they can, and it makes your work difficult, makes your job more difficult, makes interacting with your peers more difficult.
Now,
so
I wouldn't make that a generational issue.
There's plenty of dopes our age too.
I've seen plenty of folks that are our age say some of the stupidest things ever.
Hey, John, I hope you'll come back. I know, 20 years plus at Womble Bond Dickinson, a partner, high-powered attorney, and now you've reached the pinnacle of your career today being on our show. So I hope we can appreciate the gravity of the situation and how important that is. But seriously, John, I hope you can come back again, because there's a whole ton of stuff we can cover at some point down the road. So this thing could go on for hours, but I know you got to get back to work. And Teddy, are you buying lunch today? Is it?
Yeah, but I'm sorry I didn't invite you. Hey, John, thanks a lot, man. I do appreciate you showing up today. Appreciate it.
You got a quick story, Teddy? You got any stories to share?
I got one quick story.
All right.
I've been fortunate that I have not had the need for an attorney much. But I do know this. I do know that I don't know all the answers. And if the issue I got to deal with is going to cause somebody pain, me pain, and pain, by the way, can be measured in lots of ways, including dollars. The best thing I can do is call an attorney and ask for help. Just like my medical, I don't fix my own medical problems. I don't diagnose my own health issues. I go to my doctor. Same thing for a lot of stuff in life. So, John, I appreciate you being there, and I appreciate what you share. And I appreciate my legal counsel when I've had a need for them, and it's been few and far between, though, buddy. So
John, something you said, assume positive intent, or along those lines, and that's one of our practices at Goodwill. One of our, I forget what the term is for it, but the way we go about things, it's how we live our work journey there. And we try to assume positive intent until you keep proving me wrong. Then, all right, fine. Then I get it. You're a jerk, but assume positive intent. And I think when you really get down to it, and I'll kind of leave it at this, and whether it's politics, religion, or other things, we have more in common than we would differ on.
Yeah.
And I think if we keep the main thing, and try to do the right thing, that does away with a lot of the potential legal issues that may land us at John's desk going, help me. Hey, John, again, thank you so much for joining us. Teddy, why don't you take us out of here and let us know who our guest will be next week?
Hey, next week we have another attorney come and join us because Randy and I need all the help we can get. No, this is our sponsor, the Elder Law Firm, who we're grateful for being a sponsor for us. The owner, Dennis Toman, is going to join us. Listen to this topic: planning for the second half of your life in these economic times. 9 things you should know. So join us next week, 11:55 a.m. for Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. Another great show. And again, John, thanks a lot. We'll see everybody next week.
It's been an honor. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care, John. See you, man.